For most of my life, I never really looked at the spiders in my own home. The morning I started paying attention, something quietly changed. It was an ordinary morning. I had made coffee. I was standing at the window, and I noticed, in the upper corner of the frame, a small shape I had walked past every day for years. It was a spider, small, brown, almost still. It had a loose tangle of silk around it that I had previously, without thinking, classified as something to be cleaned away. But on that particular morning, for reasons I cannot fully explain, I did not reach for a cloth. I stood and looked. The spider did not move. It was waiting. I did not know, at the time, that this was what most spiders do most of the time. I did not know that the small body in the corner was not idle, but engaged in a very specific kind of attention, listening for vibration, sensing the temperature, feeling the small currents of air that moved through the room. What I noticed, in those first minutes of looking, was how present the spider was. It was not hiding from me. It was simply existing in its corner, in the same way I was existing in mine. We were sharing the room, in a way I had never quite registered before. I think the change began there. Not as a decision, but as a small reorientation. And if a spider lives in your home right now, and one almost certainly does, there may come a morning when you look at it the same way. Not because anything has changed in the spider, but because something has shifted in you. What I began to notice, in the days that followed, was that the spider in the window was not the only one. There were others. There had always been others. There was one in the corner of the bathroom. There was one behind the bookshelf in the living room. There was one in the basement stairs, in a place I had never paid attention to. They had all been there, for years in some cases. What I had never done was look. I do not think this is a story unique to me. I think it is, very gently, a story most of us could tell. We share our homes with many small lives we have learned to glance over. The spiders are simply the ones we have, culturally, decided to glance over with the most determination. They are the most visible of the small residents of a home, and yet, paradoxically, we have trained ourselves to see past them. The morning I started paying attention, I began to understand something about the geography of my own home that I had never really thought about. The corners I never went near were not empty. The spaces behind the furniture I never moved were not unused. The small gaps where the floor met the wall were not gaps. They were neighborhoods. They had been neighborhoods for as long as I had lived in the house. And I had been the only resident who had no idea who lived next door. I began to learn the names of the spiders. The small brown one in the corner of the window turned out to be a common house spider, Peristeatota tepidariiorum, the same species that lives in nearly every home in the country. The slow-moving one with the long, thin legs in the basement was a cellar spider, Pholcus phalangioides, one of the most successful indoor spiders in the world. The small jumping spider that occasionally appeared on the kitchen windowsill in the summer was, I learned, a Phytopus species, with eyes more sophisticated than nearly any other invertebrate. Each name was a small door opening. Each name turned a vague brown shape into a particular life with a particular history. And once a creature has a name, in the quiet logic of attention, it becomes much harder to dismiss. I want to say something about what changed in me, but I find it difficult to describe exactly. It was not that I suddenly loved spiders. It was something quieter. It was that I began to register them as participants in the space I lived in, rather than as small irregularities to be ignored. It was that I began to consider, when I moved through a room, that I was not the only one moving through it. It was that I began to feel, in a way I had not felt before, that the home I lived in was not only mine. This last shift, I think, was the deepest. The idea that a home is fully ours is something most of us hold without ever quite stating it. The walls are ours. The floors are ours, the corners are ours, even the ones we never look into. Letting that idea soften, even a little, even just in the case of a small spider in a window, turned out to be a quieter thing than I expected, and a more lasting one. There is a particular kind of attention that the world's older traditions have long associated with spiders. In Japan, the spider has been a small teacher of patience. In Native American traditions, the spider has been a weaver, a connector, a holder of threads between things. In West African folklore, the spider is the keeper of stories. In each of these traditions, the spider asks something of the person who notices it. Not devotion, not awe, just attention. I think this is the small gift the spiders offered me in the months after that first morning. They asked me to pay attention, and in paying attention to them, I began to pay attention to other things I had not noticed. The light in particular corners at particular hours, the way dust gathered in some places and not others, the slow rhythms of a house that, when no one looks at them carefully, blend into a single undifferentiated background. The spiders did not change me, they simply gave me a small place to begin. What I have come to believe, slowly, is that the homes we live in are far richer than we usually allow them to be. There is more happening in any room than we register. There are more lives, more rhythms, more small movements, more quiet weather than the human mind has time to notice in any single day. The spider in the corner is one of the most accessible reminders of this. You can stand in front of it. You can watch. You can begin to learn. And once you have learned to see one small life in a corner of your home, you tend to begin to see others. The small flies that follow the warm air rising from a heater. The very small insects that move through the grain of a wooden floor. The slow accumulation of dust into patterns that, if you look at them carefully, reveal the small wind currents of a room. These were always there. The spiders simply opened the door. I think this is what some of the world's older spiritual traditions have understood when they treated the spider as a teacher. Not because the spider has wisdom to give, but because the spider is one of the easiest creatures to begin paying attention to. It does not move quickly. It often holds still. It chooses corners. It returns to the same places. It is, in a sense, an unusually patient subject for the kind of attention that, once practiced on a spider, can be practiced on almost anything. The morning I started paying attention to the spiders in my home, I did not know any of this. I only knew that I had stood at a window for longer than I usually did, and that something in the room had grown slightly larger as a result. The spider, when I finally walked away from the window that morning, did not move. It stayed in its corner, doing what it had been doing all along. But the room, when I left it, was different. Some changes are not changes in the world, but changes in the kind of attention we bring to it. Some quiet mornings begin a way of seeing that lasts longer than the morning itself.